Hola, I'm Gerson Borrero, editor-at-large at City and State New York, and today we're going to be talking to a person who is actually in the mix of things. Since I met him, Basil Smikle has been really, we've known each other for a while. It just so happens that now in your new position, back in April you were named the executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, an organization wielding tremendous power, especially in the context of this national election. First of all, how are you doing? Everything good?
Everything's great. Job is great. I love what I do. And it's a good time to be executive director.
What does that mean? Because, you know, from outside, it's always like there is a New York State Democratic Party. Most people, including those of us that continue to spread that and encourage people to think that there is only one Democrat here. His name is Andrew Cuomo. Why did the governor call you in for this, and what do you bring to the table for this national election that New York State has to look good at? I mean, we have a favorite daughter, if you will, and we have a not too favorite son or on the other side, but with regards to Democrats.
Well, you know, I think one of the things that Governor Patterson, who's the chair of the party at the time, he has since resigned as party chair, but when he made the announcement in the paper that I had come on, I think one of the things that he acknowledged, and I certainly pride myself on the fact that I've had good political training, but I've also had good policy training and formal training in school. And as coming out of graduate school at Columbia at SIPA, I was actually a budget and policy analyst, my first job out of graduate school. So I've actually had a lot of formal policy training and have done that for pretty much every person that I've worked for. But also, I know the politics, and I love being on the ground, and I love going to Democratic clubs, and I love traveling the state. There's 62 counties. I've been to 20 or 21 already, even since April. And I like talking to people and really finding out how the party itself can really serve their interests better, not just around election time, but in between those election days. So I think that's what they saw in me, and I hope to be able to put that to work for the state.
Where are we right now? The Democratic Party has, you know, the whole congressional delegation, the top leaders of the party have endorsed the one candidate, Hillary Rodham Clinton, even though Bernie Sanders was born in Brooklyn. Nobody's paid any attention to him. Sorry, Bernie. But where are we at right now? Is the Democratic Party in New York State ahead of the pack in terms of the other 49 states? And the territories that are coming in as, you know, holding caucuses and primaries. Does that give New York State an advantage at the convention floor?
Well, so what's interesting, I actually have 56 peers, because we also count the Virgin Islands, we count Guam, so actually have. I didn't know that at first, but when I got to the job, okay, so when I went to the first, the state chairs have an organization, and so the chairs and the EDs, we meet twice a year at some point, someplace in the country, and I got to meet my counterpart from the Virgin Islands and from Puerto Rico, from Guam, and so on, which was great. You know, New York has this, so there are a couple of things. New York our primary is in April. As we have heard a lot about it, we hear every presidential cycle, Iowa, New Hampshire, Iowa's a caucus, New Hampshire's the first primary. Then you have South Carolina, Nevada in the next two. And then we eventually get to New York in April. April 19th is our primary date. So when I talk to my counterparts across the country, we share stories, we share strategies, we talk about what good practices in each state for things like recruiting candidates in rural areas. One thing that's not as known to many is that New York is one of the 5 most agrarian states in the country. And you would know that if you didn't go above Rockland much. But once you get up into, you know, sort of southern tier, other parts of the state, very rural state. So recruiting candidates, being able to do voter turnout in some of these areas where, for example, in Manhattan, you may have 3 or 4 members of Congress representing the borough, but you also have upstate, you can have 10 counties within one congressional district. So what are the challenges there? I share that conversation. We have that conversation among ourselves, my peers across the country. And as far as New York is concerned, in the presidential contest, because we're a little later, we don't play as heavily as some of those earlier states. But because Hillary is from our state, she's got tremendous amount of support. As you said, the governor, both U.S. senators, and I think almost every Democratic member of Congress has endorsed her. And a number of counties are starting to do that as well. She is going to get a lot of support in New York. And we may not play very heavily in terms of the deciding state. And you saw in 2008 how every state really mattered. We may not get here this time, maybe we do, but if we don't, New York's certainly going to send her to the convention with a huge turnout in April, and we're going to be in a great position to celebrate her. She's the nominee.
I want to go back to what you said in terms of the counting significance of the presidential election, and some people don't think about it. I'm glad you brought it up because it is important to a party structure to also take into account what can be done in a presidential year, which the voter turnout is at an all-time high. It stimulates voters throughout the country and in counties, and certainly that's important for the party and why it's important. But before we get to that, New York may not be, as you suggest, given it's in April, and it may have already, but the superdelegates, I understand, people sometimes, and I quite frankly will not pretend to understand because the party rules change. Mm-hmm. Hillary's already, I think, if I'm not mistaken, as of today, November 23rd, when you were sitting down to have this conversation, she's already at the 800 count of superdelegates, and superdelegates have they don't have to listen, as I understand it, correct me, Basil, if I'm wrong. Superdelegates do not have to listen to whatever the primary results are of their state. Is that correct?
Those are what we would consider unpledged delegates. So there are two types of delegates for all intents and purposes. There are pledged and unpledged. A pledged delegate is what we would consider a district level, among them is what we would consider a district level delegate. So in New York, there are 163 of those. So what happens is every congressional district, there are 27 in the state, every congressional district has a certain allotment of delegates that are on the ballot when you go vote in your Democratic primary. So a lot of people think that you go vote for your candidate in a Democratic primary. You actually don't. You vote for delegates supporting a candidate to go to the convention. So those delegates that you're supporting are pledged for that presidential candidate. So Hillary will have a slate, Bernie Sanders will have a slate, Martin O'Malley will have a slate, assuming that they get on the ballot. I assume that they all will. When we circulate petitions starting at the end of December. And so, so you have a number of district level delegates. Those are all pledged to a particular candidate. Those so-called superdelegates, which you heard a lot about in 2008 in the race between Hillary and President Obama in the primary, are folks who are uncommitted, but they're party leaders. They're governors, members of the U.S. Senate, members of Congress that don't necessarily have to be on the ballot and be pledged on primary day. And then there are other types of delegates that are party leaders that get seated at the actual convention, so they make their decision down the road. So those are the types of delegates that we're talking about, those super delegates that are not running at the district level and therefore do not have to state a preference for president.
The way the math is done in all of this, so that, and I'm fascinated by it, of course, those are the rules that you all have agreed upon in the National Democratic, right? Okay, so we're set on that. All right, going back to what it is, the process here, you mentioned O'Malley, Governor Martin O'Malley. Will he still be in the race? Do you think that we may wind up with, no, I'm serious.
No, I mean, it's a serious question. No, I know.
It's so, at this chance, look, you are not only just the executive that you describe yourself. The resume is very impressive. You know the nuts and bolts. You've run for office, and you've also
I did.
So I know the history. So
not
I know.
President.
No, not president. Not yet anyway.
No,
you never know. But is there a chance that we may be looking at a 2016 convention that only has two candidates, that being Senator Sanders and Hillary Rodham Clinton, the ex-Secretary of State, and also Senator from New York, and ex-First Lady?
Well, if I can handicap this, if I were doing that, we've seen two candidates leave already. That was Lincoln Chafee and Jim Webb. Lincoln Chafee, from Rhode Island, and Jim Webb from Virginia. I believe there was a story about a week or so ago that Martin O'Malley has already cut staff. That's sort of a sign
Yes.
that's sort of a sign that the fundraising is difficult, and it's difficult to pay folks, number one, and number two, that you're cutting back because you're trying to streamline and sort of make a last push. Now, I expect both Hillary and Bernie to be on the ballot in New York, because as I said, they have to circulate petitions in late December and all of January, actually. I don't know if Governor O'Malley is going to be able to circulate petitions here, because there are also a number of, he has 4 states he's got to get on the ballot before that, and their deadlines are approaching, if not happened already. I think South Carolina, you had to, I think Hillary has already gotten on the ballot there. But getting on the ballot in New York is still a fairly complex process, because you have to circulate petitions. You need 5,000 signatures statewide, if I remember correctly, and 1,000 per congressional district.
That much I know.
So it's a tough process for someone who doesn't have the resource to do that. So I don't know. I would really like to see what happens in December when petitions actually hit the ground and how many people he has out there. If not, it's going to be tough for him to go into April.
Doesn't this become, just really bad news, inherently bad news for young voters? For example, my son, who's 18, will vote for the first time in next year's presidential election, and he's full of idealism. I'm old enough but young enough to remember that, in 1972 when I voted for George McGovern, that they wiped the floor with us. You come with that, and you hear, I've been hearing about reform and making it easier for people to run so that, the electorate has a broad range of opinions and platforms and candidates. It's getting worse, man. How much? Some people saying $200 billion may be spent in this process. I mean, is that the American way? Are we ever going to have reform and something that is leveled in an economic playing field?
So there are 2 things. One, if you're talking where it comes to ballot access, I think New York is actually fairly good with that compared to other states. So voters have a fairly easy time getting to the polls and voting. And number 2, a candidate can actually get onto the ballot in a process that's probably a little more complex than other states, but still pretty, relatively easy for someone that actually really wants to run statewide or nationally. That said, we live in a post-Citizens United environment where the Supreme Court said that corporations are people, and in the sort of super PAC environment that we're in now, it is going to take a tremendous amount of money to both mount a viable campaign, let alone a successful one, for national office. We're not, other countries do it differently. Ecuador, for example, presidential candidates don't have to pay for TV time. It's allotted and it's free. And the period that you have to campaign is actually much more condensed. That's not where we are in this country. You have to pay for TV, you have to pay for mail to the extent people are still doing mail. Data mining for the analytics, those Facebook, Twitter analytics and Google analytics that campaigns, very sophisticated ones, are using right now, that costs tremendous amounts of money. And so in this post-Citizens United environment, and Democrats didn't do this initially. We were actually slow to do the super PAC thing, to do the independent expenditure thing. But in order to stay competitive, both parties have had to do this. So unless you change Citizens United, unless you actually go back to the Supreme Court and start changing some of these frameworks, you're going to see campaigns get more and more expensive.
And you and I are not going to be able to resolve that, whether I say $200 billion or $200 billion. It's still a lot of, so much money is disgusting in my opinion. The context of how the Democrats are preparing to run against whoever the Republican nominee is, and if it's Hillary or Bernie Sanders, you as the son of an immigrant from Jamaica, your parents are, you understand the context of what we people who have migrated to or immigrated to the city, or undocumented people. Now it's, the latest punching bag for Donald Trump is refugees, and for other candidates on the Republican side. What do Democrats do? It's a changing paradigm. It's like, where are we in terms of having a voice, a significant, reasonable voice that will come across to people that are supposed to be integral to what the United States is supposed to be?
Well, it's interesting because I think what you're hearing now are Democrats reminding Republicans about American values. It used to be the other way around, where Republicans would always talk about values, 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 traditional American values. It's the Democrats have really been doing that in this debate about refugees. Not that it wasn't being done before, but what's amazing to me is that from the right, you're hearing all of this draconian, very authoritarian language coming from the right, particularly Mr. Trump, who has demonized immigrants and communities of color across the country. And we had Governor Cuomo very early on come out and say, this is not who we are as Americans. Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton, I used to work for her as a senator, so I always go back to
that's how I met you.
That's what I was like. So Secretary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley, they've all said this, and you've heard Democrats across the country say that, no, we're supporting our president. We need, not only do we not need to have a Muslim registry, we do not need to have surveillance on mosques. We actually should be welcoming refugees. And by the way, for all the governors, all Republican, with one exception, that said that they're going to refuse refugees, that's unconstitutional. And so we.
But it's connecting. It's connecting. It's connecting within the Republican Party more so than ever. He seems to be rising in the polls every time Donald Trump makes these absurdities of remarks which are offensive and inhumane. He seems to be catching on. Is that what America is all about now?
I think some Americans are supporting that message, but I find it interesting that a few of the candidates, and the Republican candidates, I think they should be doing this more. You have Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and Jeb Bush saying, no, we can't be doing this. This isn't who we are. But I don't think they've been strong enough on this. I don't think they've been strong historically during the course of Donald Trump's comments about immigrants and about these refugees, that they have not been strong enough in pushing him back and setting the tone for what the Republican Party should be talking about. So right now you've got Donald Trump and to a lesser extent Dr. Carson really controlling the messaging in the Republican Party, and even the moderates within that party are having a hard time getting through.
Before I get to the exit question, Dr. Carson, I sometimes am stunned. I'm waiting, and I don't see people of color, I'm talking about Latinos or blacks, criticizing this guy on a major party who happens to look like us. We understand where he's coming from. Even some of the stories we could believe in his exaggeration. How come we're not criticizing, even Latinos and blacks, if we're not saying, yo, bro, what's up with you?
Part of it's a disappointment, because for a number of years, Dr. Carson was a significant figure, particularly in the African American community. The books that he's written, the things that he's talked about in terms of what was happening in communities of color, urban communities of color, what he was seeing in hospitals. I mean, this is an individual that a lot of folks of color looked up to. And I think what you're seeing now is just an incredible disappointment. An incredible amount of disappointment, and saying, you know what, I'm just not even going to deal with that because he's gone, he's lost to us. Now,
are we making a mistake by doing that?
I don't know. I think we're making a mistake if
it was a white man, we'd be saying stuff.
Well, and I take that point, and I think that we're making a mistake if we don't challenge him to correct his statements. I absolutely believe that to be the case. But I do think that what's happened is you've seen the disappointment, and people say, you know what, he's just gone. He's lost to us, and we're just not going to pay him any mind. But I think, like everyone else, we should hold him accountable for everything that he's saying.
On the exit question, what can we look forward to being the message from the Democrats here in New York State? And I assume that Governor Cuomo will have a major speech to deliver to this convention in 2016. What will we be hearing? I mean, it's always not fair to Andrew, but he is compared to Papa Cuomo, and Mario, got to come up with something. What would be the things that we look forward to in that message from Governor Cuomo that he delivers on the convention?
I tell you, Governor Cuomo is a progressive governor. We're talking about raising the minimum wage, the fight for 15. He has worked to end sexual assault on college campuses, the property tax cap. I mean, there's so many
Same-gender marriage,
gun control, same-sex marriage, which happened very early in his tenure as governor.
Gun control, you mentioned also,
and as I said, gun control. And you're here. And how many times has that come up because of
right.
these incidents across the country? And he's still a leader on that. And so, what I look at is a very progressive governor that I think when you look at his conversation, it's also about mass incarceration. There's so many things that that this governor is talking about that you'll hear also from Secretary Clinton. That really is leading the country. Let me also say this. In all of the conversations about Black Lives Matter and about what's happening with criminal justice around the country, this governor got a special prosecutor by executive order to investigate crimes when civilians are killed by law enforcement. Controversial in some corners, but the right thing to do, and led the country in doing this.
But it does have a cap of 1 year. That's 1 year that it's all for, right?
Yeah, but I assume
no,
the governor. It goes with his tenure. It's with his tenure.
Okay.
And so I imagine that the governor is going to continue to fight for this, and it's led the country.
We'll have you back after the whole process, but what happens if there's no Hillary as president? Do we look at Governor Cuomo as a possibility of the new leadership in the Democratic Party?
He's already leading.
He won't be the, okay. Yeah, but there's going to be a cap because it ain't going to be the Joe Biden is gone, Hillary won't get another shot, Bernie Sanders will be collecting Social Security or something else soon. So is that, it doesn't seem the Democrats have young people really wanting to aspire to.
We got a great bench. You've got, look, you
We
mentioned
do?
governor.
Bench. So will Cuomo be leading the bench of the new tier?
Yeah, I could see him there. There's Kamala Harris in California. She's an outstanding attorney general who's running for the Senate right now.
She may not win that.
Look, I actually think she could win that. You've got also a mayor of Los Angeles and a mayor of San Francisco, all very great, candidates there. We've got a lot here in the Northeast, so we've got incredible talent across the country. People I'm really excited about, including our governor.
Basil Smikle, thank you so
Good
much.
to see you.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
With all the different personalities and all the political heavyweights that you're going to be dealing with as we go into the 2016 presidential election. I'm Gerson Borrero. Thanking you for tuning in. See you next time at City and State.